This is my view, and it is not the view of everybody. And I hope friends, after I've spoke, will feel that they can express their views, even if they are quite contrary to mine. Right. First of all, a rhetorical question. What is education for in the 21st century? Throughout history, education has provided to be the vaccination for poverty and for the gaps between the haves and the have-nots. In 1440, a school was set up by some religious philanthropists to educate the sons of poor clergy. On seeing this model and how well it was developed, a number of trades and religious organizations did the same. And it went well. The poor of different trades and religionizations were educated well. So now, in the 20th century, those schools are well known. We all know them all. They're called Eton, Rugby, Harrow, and Winchester, to name but a few. The rich, in seeing how well these schools done, got themselves elected onto the governing bodies. Within a generation, the change in the terms of governments that they'd initiated, so the schools become as you see them today. Private fee paying, with no chance of any poor children able to get any admission at all. You might say, no, these schools have bursaries. And I would say, like the Dickens thing, humbug. These bursaries are used by those of very good financial means to get their children educated without having to pay out too much money. Also, these schools have become charities. That always surprised me when I first heard of it, because they are extremely wealthy. They have extremely wealthy grants given to them by different companies which the parents of these children go to. So if that is a charity in many more terms as I think about it, I'm an elephant. Also, these schools are called public schools. Another statement which I find should be having an enormous raspberry next to it, because they're far from any word public which I know of. If you look at the top jobs that are in society today, in civil service, within the judges, barristers. If you look at the majority of Tory MPs, you will find that they all went to the different fee-paying public schools, and then on to one of the Russell Group universities. This, to me, is not something which I think in a democratic society we should allow to continue. Going on to state education, we find a very different state of play. A lot of finance is needed to keep it going. Teachers and facilities of these schools are far less than the schools that I spoke of before. Within your modern comp, you'll find classes with around 30 children or more sometimes. A friend of mine, who is an ex-teacher, said that he felt that teaching in one of these schools, one of these classes, was more like crowd control rather than teaching. But if one were to look at the curriculum of many of these places, the curriculum is very thin, and it does not, I would say, develop a child. We all, and I look around you and would say, we're all about my age or thereabouts. And if you remember the things, the 3 R's back in the time when we went to school: reading, writing, and arithmetic. These are still being developed, but I would say, friends, that the subjects are taught, and they are taught so that the child has to pass certain tests, and you're taught to pass the tests. Where are these lessons which will develop more of the child's attitude, more of the child's way of life? In most curriculums these days, music isn't taught. I find that surprising. And cooking. You will remember cooking. You had it at school when you were younger. You might say, but there's food technology nowadays. And again, that would give a big humbug in raspberry, because that doesn't work in the sense that children should know how to cook basic things. They enjoy doing it as well. And to remove those enjoyments from children is a pushing in of the things that the child should be encouraged to teach or should be encouraged to do. And also, I would like to suggest that we as teachers in that sense, should teach to most children philosophy, how to put forward an argument, how to actually think for yourself. To the Minister of Education would class that as near heresy. You know, children thinking for themselves in a state school, whatever next. I strongly believe that there needs to be a root and branch change starting within schools. It will cost a lot of money. It will cost an extremely large amount of money. But I believe that all our children are worth that money. They're worth paying that money for. I would start with class size. As I said earlier, 30 or above. It's not a place where you can actually get a child to learn, to get the children, the teachers to teach properly, to understand each child and their needs. Secondly, the COVID epidemic has shown us quite powerfully of the woeful shortage of professional jobs which need to be done. Teachers, nurses, doctors are in enormous need at the moment, and we don't have them. I would say this is a rank failure of educational, especially the government, to encourage this type of thing, which it hasn't done. And to quote one of my brothers, education is a sausage machine. If you can read, write, and add up, you're ignored. And to quote, amusingly enough, a comedian who I think is strongly funny was Woody Allen. And he said, the question of the day is not, is there a God, but can you find a plumber on a Sunday? I like that. The skills which a person leaves in school now are different, obviously, from what they had before. Because if you want someone to mend your car, this chap will not usually turn up with his tool case and greasy overalls. Increasingly, he will turn up with a computer and chinos and t-shirt and things like that, because the development of the skills needed to fix your car are much more scientific they were than before. To have someone come to your house to do your electrics or to do your plumbing, I would say you want a skilled person who you can have confidence in, to understand his skills, to understand that he has been trained well. Not some Joe Bloggs who is a cowboy and will fix it and run away with your money. That needs education. That needs going to tech schools and places like that, which are, again, I feel, are in woeful short supply at the moment. I admit the world has changed. It has moved on since I was at school. I started school when I was 5 years old in 1955. And I was there till 1970. 55, 60, so yeah, that is right. My maths is good still. And then on in 73 till 75 at Sussex University. This is something which, again, university. Many people now are leaving university with a degree and with no jobs because things are changing. Society is changing, and therefore we have to change with it. Going back for a little while to schools, I'm saddened by the breakup of schools into groups that people are now able to set up their own school, to run the schools outside the state system. Too many of these schools, friends, close after a couple of years, leaving quite a number of children in limbo. This is a problem which I think can only grow over the years, as the more groups become into groups, each religion or each person with an idea of what they want to do, then produces their own reason why they exist. To me, children need a full idea of religion, not just one small sliver, and they are protected from other groups. And you'll be lucky because you're lucky here because I said to my brother that I was doing this, and he said, you should leave out one thing which you argue on and you upset people occasionally. And I said, what could you mean? And he said, you know very well what I mean. And I said, yes. And I said, homeschooling, you mean? And he said, yes. And I said, I will only say one thing about that. Most of it shouldn't be allowed. It's bad. I have also strong doubts about a group of schools from America. It's called Oasis schools. You'll see them in Bristol. You'll see them in other parts of England as well. This is the group which teach creationism as a scientific subject. They call it intelligent design. Now there's an oxymoron. I will say no more. No doubt some friends will maybe come back to me on this afterwards in a few moments. There was a headline I saw in the newspapers a little while ago, and it said, the unskilled worker is the next pandemic. I think that is very good. It's a very good statement because from what I have said before, this is the problem. We don't have any industry in England at the moment. We have stopped making things. Production lines disappeared many, many, many years ago. And other industries have swept off until the Far East and other places. You can see in a lot of towns now, they have new shopping centres, which people go to a lot and spend money. But we have no concept of where this money goes, where the generation of this money is. And I think that is something which could be for a whole discussion at some other date. My last comment, and this is the one which I vacillated for quite a long time whether I would put this in or not. And then I thought, if I'm really honest in what I believe, I have to include this as well. Quakers believe that good education is something worth having, something worth campaigning for. Good education gives us all a better way of life. But Quakers have developed a blind spot when it comes to fee-paying Quaker schools. That has taken me quicker than I thought it would. But that is all I have for you today, friends. So I am happy for people to give their comments, ask me questions, disagree with me, saying, Ray, that was a whole lot of rubbish. I hope you won't, but there you go.
Oh, well, I really enjoyed that anyway, Ray. Thank you very much indeed. Right, who would like to come up first with a question? Oh, so you're still muted. Hattie, you're muted.
Please unmute yourselves.
Other people can go first. I've got quite strong feelings about some things you've said, Ray.
Good. That would be a good start.
Okay, just starting at the end then. First of all, I was shocked about Oasis. I don't understand how they're, in quotes, allowed to teach creationism. Anyway. Second, the idea that industry in England is disappearing and the production lines disappeared many, many years ago. I would just hold up the example of the production lines for the vaccines, which have been developed in advance, very thoughtfully and ready to go. I know that's just one example. And also the idea about the blind spot for fee-paying Quaker schools. Would you like to say a bit more about that and give some evidence? What's the issue there?
Right.
The idea, the reason for that is that I do not believe in having to pay for education. In Finland, 2 years ago, they passed a law banning making it against the law to have to pay for education.
Great.
I would love that to happen in England. You know, the second thing I would say upon that, this is a very personal thing as well, is that why on earth do parents send children away to boarding school?
Yeah.
Don't you like them? You know, children should be at home at weekends and evenings, and you should enjoy being with your children. To send children away from boarding schools I've read from the age of 6 to 18, no, it's wrong. That's my evidence.
I have to say, some kids do benefit from boarding school, and they even choose it. They love it. I chose and I loved it, but it wasn't when I was 6. It wasn't put upon me.
I think we would have different views there.
Yeah, and look at the damage it's done to me. Yeah.
Ooh, nice.
I have to say, out of our class of 30, 3 have committed suicide. Not nice. That's 10%. What a waste.
I didn't attend a boarding school, but most people, just carrying on that theme, most people I know who did go to boarding school were not happy with the experience. But I wanted to come on to 2 other points. Just very briefly, passing tests and the sense that the education system is just schooling children to churn out exam results is a product of the Ofsted regime. And I think that's where the change has got to come for that. And we should be campaigning for that. But I wanted to more fully pick up on another point you made, which was about cooking. Now, I'm in a book group which has quite a diverse age range. I'm actually the oldest at 69. The youngest with 2 children is in her early 30s, and we range between that. Now, our book group discusses lots of things apart from the book. And one of the things we felt of discussing was why is the death rate in the UK so very high, and what is going on in our society that people are basically unhealthy. Now, I was the only one there who learnt cooking at school, and I've got my old cookery book from my lessons, and actually it's very sound. I had the advantage as well that both my grandmother and my mother were quite good cooks, so I learnt cooking from them as well. But as part of the discussion, one of the people in the book group, whose sister actually now is an anaesthetist working in Manchester Hospital, but she was describing food technology, which she took as a subject. And the whole thing was just geared around one meal and sort of like the technology of it. Nothing about ingredients and how you create well-balanced, good meals. And I think it connects with what you're saying, Ray, about we're not preparing children for life in what we're doing in school. And I would sort of advocate that those life skills are really essential for our children.
I wonder, Ray, whether you can suggest a Quaker education project that we might propose, something that Quakers ought to aim for in the field of education, perhaps.
That I would say is, campaigning for smaller classes so that children feel that they do, and 2 is to persuade this government that, as Anna said, the Ofsted and their religious. There you go. You see, Freudian and all that lot. You get your money's worth today. No, the rigid standards there, we should be encouraging lifelong learning with children, which starts when they are young. And we can only do that if we can reach the children. We are not doing that at the moment with so big classes. I would like to see Quakers campaigning for education, but as I would say, real education, not what we are getting the children in your local comp at the moment.
Ray, do you have any ideas about what we could do about fee-paying schools, particularly the top end, so to speak, the ones that you mentioned at the beginning? Do you think there's anything that we could actually do about that?
Yes, campaign for their charitable status to be removed. All comps and other schools in England have to pay taxes. Those schools don't. That would be the first thing, I think, you know, which I would say, you know, is worth doing.
Wow. Wow.
Who'd like to go next? I've only got a partial screen today. It's very annoying. Usually you're all laid out nicely and I can see everybody. Oh golly, I've lost you all now. Help. Help. More education needed here.
Gina, you wanted to say something, I think.
Ray, I don't know the details, but I believe Finland has abolished all private education. Is that true? And how did it come about?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
Finland has abolished all private education. How did that come about?
I don't know.
Anybody know?
Mary?
There's a funny echo. I think. Hang on a second.
Thank you for muting one Mary.
Oh, is that it? Okay.
Gina, speak to us.
I hope you can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
I believe that education starts much earlier than a child going to primary school. It starts at home or with play groups with other people. And one of the problems in Britain and probably other countries is that education is unequal because families are poor. Parents, and I'm not using immigration as a problem. I think somewhere or other, families who have immigrated to this country, if they speak another language, it's often the mother who is left out of it. Dad goes to work, mixes with other people. The boys go to work, mixes with other people. So I think the question of education is has wider implications than where we are with public schools, private schools, and comprehensive schools, wherever. I think education in this country or in any country has to start very early on. If you know children who have mixed with other children at an early age and they are equal within that group, they have a better chance of having a fuller education than a child whose parents don't mix. with other groups of parents. It's quite a, and I was delighted to see that, that in one of the local shops there was a very big notice giving the details of the website to send money to Home Start.
Ah,
And I think Home Start, there is education in play, not just in learning the 3 R's. They learn it through many ways.
Homestart is one of those projects which was cut by this present government.
So I would be campaigning for Home Start.
so there's a letter to our MP which should go off from all of us all at once.
Now that would be a good idea.
And also, you may be amused to know, it's a friend of mine teaches in one of the infant schools in Easton, and she said that in one of the schools, she remembered chatting to her friend of hers, was that the children spoke 15 different languages. Yeah, wow.
Not bad. Dave, what did you want to ask?
I just wanted to comment, really, that it's my impression that there's a fundamental misapprehension in public debate about education. Education is essential, and it's the means by which our society progresses.
Yeah.
That is something which is never referred to in debates about how we can afford tertiary education, for example. So in the abolition of grants to go to universities, that was never on the currency of discussion, as it were. It wasn't alluded to. And I think it might be helpful to sort of attempt, wherever possible, to re-inject that into that a statement of that assumption into debate wherever possible.
Oh, I agree.
What do others think?
Yeah. When I went to university, and I'm sure all of us here today who went to university, we got grants. We didn't have to pay for those types of things. Now, students leave university with what? 20,000 debt, which is, quite disgraceful.
Mary, did we? I think your question got a bit lost. Did you want to say it again? Would that be all right?
Yes, I was talking about Finland, where they don't pay. There aren't any state schools.
No. Hang on a minute.
There's an echo, isn't there?
Yeah, Mary,
Yes.
you've got 2 devices turned on. Is your mobile on as well, or your laptop or something?
It should be off. How do you know that?
We've got an echo. Quite a big echo.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Well spotted.
But Ray did answer it.
Yes.
Well, I beg your pardon, Ray. I've obviously lost the plot at that point.
I mean,
sorry.
I think Mary means that there are not to be private schools in Finland.
Yeah, so you can't charge for education.
Yes, I'd wondered how that works if, at my time of life, I wanted to learn the clarinet or something, or, you know, because in this country, most of that you have to pay for. Anyway, I think Susan wanted to say something. She had her hand up.
We can still hear Mary's background, by the way. Yeah. I've been, one thing that I've always felt is this idea of there being halcyon days for state education are a bit remiss. I mean, when I was at school, it was 44, 45 kids in a class. My grandfather, who was born in 74, left school before he was 10. My other grandparents all left school at 13, and education was very clearly to prepare them for the world of work. So they were trained to be, they did learn about cooking and laundering because they were going to go into service, the girls, and the boys went into factories and service, and they went into labouring. So they were trained for the work that they were going to do. And I think that will always be the way it is. I mean, I'm vehemently against private education and vehemently against Quaker private schools, although I think maybe adult learning musical instruments is slightly different. But I don't see why it shouldn't be possible to combine the two things, actually producing workers for the society that we need the workers for, but also to do it in a benign way so that people can actually learn how to be decent human beings and to learn skills that they want to learn. I mean, I never went to university as a youngster, but even when I did go, when I did my master's, I was there for the sake of, because I wanted to learn and I wanted to think and I wanted to discuss ideas, and that was actually essential for my work. So, you know, you can have the sort of people that we need in society now need to know how to think. They need to understand about philosophy. They need to understand about ethics, as well as have very practical skills. So, you know, I don't see why. I mean, I don't know what they learn in private schools, public schools. But I think they're very dysfunctional. They don't learn things that is actually going to make them better, more productive human beings, which is what I think we should be trying to do.
Patsy, if you can only see some of us, it may be that you're not in gallery view. If you look at the top right.
Well, I think I was. I think I am. I am in gallery view. Okay. And I used to, when I got gallery view before, you were all spread out in front of me. But now I have to click on a screen to see the second lot of people, which makes it a bit more difficult.
Oh, right. You're spread out for some reason. Anyway,
yeah.
I had heard, just to come back to Mary's question, I had heard good things said about Finnish education, so I didn't want to just ignore it. I found something from the World Economic Forum, which I could read, and it will only take a couple of moments. Many school systems are so concerned with increasing test scores and comprehension in maths and science, they tend to forget what constitutes a happy, harmonious, and healthy student and learning environment. Many years ago, the Finnish school system was in need of some serious reforms. The program that Finland put together focused on returning back to the basics. It wasn't about dominating with excellent marks or upping the ante. Instead, they looked to make the school environment a more equitable place. Since the 1980s, Finnish educators focused on education should be an instrument to balance out social inequality. All students receive free school meals, ease of access to healthcare, psychological counselling, individual guidance, and beginning with the individual in a collective environment of equality. And students start school when they're at 7. They don't have this rush to get into preschool, kindergarten and everything. Children are allowed to be children until they're 7. And so I went back to look that up. The thing I wanted to mention, I've been reading a book by a Swiss educationalist who is proposing a completely new approach to education. She's all of 18 years old. Her name is Christina von Dreyen, and she's talking about schools for heart-based learning. It's unacceptable that children have to adapt to the social system or the school system. It should be the other way around. Schools should adapt to children, recognize the potential there is in each child, and find out how each child can be supported individually and in finding and following its own path. For this reason, there are no teachers in the heart-based school, as I imagine it, but qualified and loving mentors, and so on. So there are children who are survivors of the existing education system who are making quite clear what's needed in a revised education system. And I think Finland is probably halfway there, and we're not on the starting blocks. But it's not that we don't know what to do. We don't just have to have opinions about what's wrong with the current system. There are really great examples of creating education that works for children.
What's the book called, David?
The book is this is the third in a series of books by Christina von Dreyen, Dreien, and the book is called Consciousness Creates Peace. The 2 earlier books are written by the mother about her experience bringing up this rather unusual child, and they are a sort of manual for parents who find themselves with exceptionally highly conscious children. But by book 3, Christina is running her own gigs and writing her own book.
There was a time when I was working and we came across some forms of education which I got very worked up about. Euphemism being very cross. One of them was a chap called A.S. Neal, who produced a place called Summer Hill, which was the total lack of education. And personally, I thought the man was a blithering idiot. But because he was saying that children learn when they want to. And he set up this school, and I would basically add here, where the children could do what they liked. They could break up the school if they liked. But, you know, if they did, it was up to the parents to pay for it. So you had these rather wealthy parents who went to A.S. Neal's school. And in the end, it just worked for some, for very few, but in the end, it closed down because it would have to be saying today a failed school. And this is something I would say as an example of going totally the other way. I believe schools should have discipline in them, so the child has a safe place to learn, but the child should be encouraged to learn. Yes, in the work in my professional life, I found I was dealing with some very disturbed children who come from disturbed families and all this lot. And they needed the discipline to start with, to get them on the right track, to be able to go, wow, that's interesting. And the most delightful thing in the world, friends, and we've all seen it, is when you're saying something to a child and the child gets what you're saying, understands what you're saying, and the joy on their face as they just realize that they understand that. It's the most wonderful thing in the world.
Yes, a friend of mine was, oh, sorry.
No, don't carry on.
I put my hand up, and I know Julia wants to say something, but a friend of mine, her a group she was in of young people, and one boy, I think it's in a school context, and absolutely everything he said, that's so boring, that's so boring, that's so boring. So he hadn't learned to enjoy. He had not learned to enjoy anything by the sounds of it. So sad. Julia had her hand up, but I don't know if Patsy can see that.
I know, I'm so sorry. I'll have to try and sort this out by next week, because I can only see 2/3 of
somebody else
it.
who can see it all, I don't know.
Shall I take over?
Oh, if you can see everybody, that would be great. Yes, thank you.
Do we have Julia next?
Right. Now, I'm going to stick my neck out and say that I think that public schools, as we call them, can have an important part to play, because it isn't only the knobs that send our children there, quite honestly. The people like me, who I had someone who was a wildlife photographer as a husband, and we used to go off just on our own, just the two of us, for months at a time. We were at the lucky stage when we could do that, before all this silly business of having to have producers and lots of other people tagging along with you. And we just went off and made our own film for survival. And we could not have done it without a public school. Now, we weren't wealthy. My husband in particular had absolutely nothing when he started, absolutely nothing. And he just learned how to do everything on a shoestring. And that's how we managed. And I personally think that what's wrong with the public school is that there aren't enough other places. That's improved a heck of a lot in a lot of places, but there's still some schools that are still so far behind, and that's why they can't keep up. And I actually think that it gives you a much broader view of the world going to somewhere like a public school. I'm not saying this is the only way to do it by any means. In our particular case, it worked because we could go off and leave the dear children with somewhere responsible for weeks at a time, and then I would come back for half term and all the rest of it. But I think that there's a reason for it. Sometimes I'm not saying that everybody is marvelous at it, but I'm saying that it does have a part to play.
You were saying there that the school had a very good education.
Yeah.
I want that type of education for every child.
So do I.
Not just because you can pay for it.
Yes. Well, quite agree. Of course you should. But that's in an ideal world, and I don't know if you're going to find it. I mean, nowadays, many more people go to day school than used to. Many more. It's much more. I mean, if I was doing that again, if I wasn't having to go abroad with my husband to all sorts of weird and wonderful places, like the tundra and all these sort of strange places, of course I would rather have my children at home. It makes much more sense. And I think especially one of them suffered from being away so much. But at the time, it was the only way to carry on a livelihood. And it so happened that it suited my husband to be out on his own doing something rather than being with the crowd. He wouldn't have got on at all with the crowd.
Anne, would you like to go next?
I was just going to point out, I mean, there is a huge political aspect to how we set up our education system. And we do have, I mean, there have been parties that have put reform of the private school education on their manifesto. And I do think the removal of the charity status is really important, and we should be campaigning for that, because it does exacerbate the whole situation at the moment with COVID is exacerbating the inequalities in education. And just a quickie on boarding schools, because I can see we're running out of time. There are some state boarding schools. Some of the Scottish Islands have boarding arrangements, and the Isles of Scilly, until they set up a secondary school on St Mary's, children from the Isles of Scilly used to board at in Penzance. So there are, there is the capacity within the state system to provide that they have to provide boarding for certain children at secondary. But my more interested point is about, actually we need a political campaign about private education.
Susan, and then well, we'll see if there's anybody else wishing urgently to speak. Otherwise, we can have Ray finishing off. And then David can tell me what to do when I stop the recording. So, oh, and Hattie would like another word as well. So, but Susan first.
Yeah, I wanted to say that I've never taught children, but I did teach two separate sorts of cohorts of people who had been failed by the education system. One was teaching basic literacy to people who were in trouble with the law back in the times when the penal system used to do things like that. And one was teaching on an access course for people who wanted to go into become trained for teachers or social work or nursing or the caring professions, and had got no education but needed to get an education quickly within a year to be able to get into university, to get onto an access course. And in both situations, it was amazing how quickly people learned and how much they learned in a very short time. And these were people who'd left school. In one group of people weren't even able to read, and we could actually teach them to read well. And the other lot were people who got no qualifications, very little education, who were able to get up to the standard to go to university and to do professional training within a year. And it just highlights to me how appalling the education system is. And I think, to be honest, as long as we've got a private fee-paying education which siphons off people, we aren't going to have the energy put into providing a decent state education. And I don't think all private education is good. When I was a teenager, we moved into an area where they had only one state primary school and all the other schools were private schools. I mean, it didn't affect me, but I was appalled by the level of education that they were being taught in these private schools. It was appalling. They weren't being properly educated at all. So money actually doesn't necessarily buy a good education. And everyone should have a chance, not those whose parents could afford it. And it always amazes me when people say, oh, well, we made sacrifices to send our children to a fee-paying school. But the fee-paying school to which they sent their children, the fees were more than the average person earns in a lifetime. So you had to have a very good income to be able to make the sacrifices.
Right. So, should we hand over to Ray? And Hattie, did you want to say just one more thing briefly?
Yeah, just very short. In Germany, for absolute years, they've had a policy that you should have lifelong learning available to you for free. So there's a lot, the density of educational facilities in around cities and towns is more than we have here. And you would be able to learn your clarinet for free, I believe. I may be wrong.
No, I mean, right. Ray, would you like to?
Yes, well, thank you, everybody. I think it was a good discussion, more than I would have hoped, really. But I'd like to end with an amusing little story, which was I was working when I was a young adult in a youth club, and at the end of this evening, one of the blokes who was coming to collect a couple of his children said to me, "Can I speak to you privately?" And I said, "Well, yeah, of course you can. You know, come over here." And he said, "Can I ask you something?" And I said, "You can ask me anything you like, really." And he said, "Can you teach me to read?" And I thought, well, yes, if you're willing. I said, but kind of what brought this on? Well, he said, I've had my children, and I've really, kind of nearly conned them when they came and asked me for books. So I said to read books, and I haven't got my classes and all this lot. And he said, but now I have a 2-year-old granddaughter, and I want to be able to read to her. And, kind of, it was nearly wiping the tear from the eye bit, because I thought, wow, this is amazing. You're putting yourself forward, that I could laugh at you and say, no, I haven't got time or something like that. But it took him 9 months to start reading a basic newspaper. And then he just flew. I don't know what happened to him afterwards, because, I left the area. I went to university after about a year after that. But it just shows, that people do want to be able to understand. They do want, sometimes they're just scared that they might be laughed at, or definitely with children. The joker in the class sometimes is severe dyslexic, and no one knows about it. And that's what I'll leave you with, friends. No.
Very good.
As a comedian would say, thank you and good night.
Ray, that person who learned to read in 9 months, was that through a public facility that he learned?
No, it was through me.
You're a private facility.
But I didn't charge him anything. So.
Right. How lovely.
Person.
Well done. Next week, Jenny Smith's going to be talking to us again. Life in Bristol in the 60s. Her memoirs are very, very good. Sorry, back over to you, Christopher.
Right. I can't remember. Do we have a moment's silence before we go, or do we just wave and go?
Let's have a moment's silence.
Well, we'll have a bit of silence, and then if you all go, apart from David, who can tell me what to do with the recording.
This is.
Thank you, friends.